Jesus is an alien.
Yes, exactly.
So let's go back to a morning mass in May of 2014, and Pope Francis states, quote, "If an expedition of Martians arrives and some of them come to us, and if one of them says, 'Me, I want to be baptized,' what would happen?" It begs the question, what does the leader of the most powerful church in the world think and know about UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena? Well, our guest today thinks he may have some of those answers. A computer programmer by profession, Gabriel Pedra has a doctorate in theology from the Spain-based Teológica Servi y Salud, the Theological Commission for Service and Health, and he also has some scientific training. He's qualified in plant-based nutrition from the T. Colin Campbell Centre for Nutrition Studies at Cornell University in the US, and he's made a study of molecular biology. Gabriel's new book delves into an issue I've heard some about, but not a lot of hard detail: the Vatican's interest in UFOs and anomalous phenomena, and in particular what Gabriel reveals about the current Pope Francis's strong connections to and apparently intense interest in unidentified anomalous phenomena. His book is entitled A New Civilization: The Hidden History of the Catholic, Freemasonry and Non-Human Intelligence, and the story of Jorge Mario Bergoglio before he ascended to becoming Pope Francis is absolutely extraordinary, to say the least, and Gabriel has the details. So you might be thinking, why would we take an interest in what the Vatican and its leadership think about the UAP mystery, about the possibility of a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet? Well, it matters because there are as many as 1.4 billion baptized Catholics on this planet, a huge proportion of humanity. Catholicism is the largest branch of Christianity. It's also an extraordinarily powerful and influential soft power multinational bureaucracy with enormous spiritual and moral influence on many countries worldwide. As we'll hear today, it has its own diplomatic and intelligence service worldwide, and at the heart of this church is the Pope, Pope Francis, regarded by followers as the earthly vicar of Christ, Christ's representative on earth. Gabriel, welcome to Reality Check. You say in your book that the Vatican's had an interest in the subject of UAP and its occupants for a long time, particularly during the papacy of Francis. It's believed that the phenomenon, you say, is behind every religion and that it comes from God, and that in this matter the Vatican is trying to prepare the world for a future revelation. Where's your evidence for that, my friend?
Well, first of all, Ross, thank you for having me here today. Well, in reality, the evidence is very deep and it's very good, because it's true that there have been popes that they have said something about the subject. For example, John Paul II, many years ago, he said something, but not publicly exactly. But regarding popes, Pope Francis is the first pope that has been very open, at least when he was in Argentina, about this subject. Well, to begin with, we can say, for example, that he was a disciple of Benito II Reina. He was a Jesuit priest, and he was an astronomer also in Argentina. He was a disciple of Bergoglio. At the beginning, Bergoglio didn't like so much about his hobbies with extraterrestrial intelligence and flying discs and all of that. But after some time, he changed his mind. I think that it was like 1988 when he began to change his mind about the subject.
So you're saying that the current Pope has taken an interest, a very close interest, in UAPs, in unidentified anomalous phenomena, through this particular mentor of his in Argentina.
Exactly. It's not a small interest, it's a very big interest. In fact, uh, we can say that is almost central in his papacy, because before becoming Pope, he knew in some way that he had to become Pope, because there was a meeting in 1988 and in a home of a person. There were two ufologists, very well known ufologists in Argentina. One of them was Pedro Romaniuk, that we can talk a, a little more in some minutes or something like that. But the other one was Acoglanis, Angel Cristo Acoglanis. They became friends of Bergoglio, and they were in a house. They were talking about extraterrestrial intelligence, life after death, and some other topics. And Acoglanis used to say that he had contacts with light beings or extraterrestrials. And he also said that he received some prophecies. One of those prophecies was, and he said to Bergoglio that day in that house, "You are going to become Pope one day." But Bergoglio said something like, "Stop bothering me, because I don't believe you." After that, Acoglanis turned his face to Romaniuk and he told him he doesn't believe me that he's going to be Pope one day.
So there was a prophecy from this guy who I think is Angel Cristo Acoglanis.
Exactly.
And this was at the home of Pedro Romaniuk. They're two Argentinian ufologists. And Acoglanis claimed to be channeling a message from extraterrestrials that Jorge Bergoglio was going to become the Pope. And that's in 1988. That's many, many years before he became Pope.
Exactly. And there are two reasons because of that. First, because Acoglanis said that his contacts were not just but mainly from Uritorco Mountain. There is a hotspot in Argentina, very well known for many ufologists, even in the US. Uritorco Mountain, many people have seen lights, flying discs. They have had communications with beings that they say that they are living inside the mountain, and Acoglanis used to say that he had contacts with those beings in that mountain. The other thing is that Bergoglio was changing his mind about the Catholic Church because he was very conservative. But after that, he began to change his mind about a lot of topics. So he became to be open about the extraterrestrial intelligence, the possibility that that could be real.
So when you say that Bergoglio was hanging out, if you like, with Acoglanis and Romaniuk, are you sure he wasn't just a sort of an incidental guest at their home? You're suggesting that he was actually actively involved and interested in the UFO subject with these gentlemen.
Well, what we know so far until now is this, that I think that from the 1990 something like that, he was very involved, mainly with Pedro Romaniuk, because Angel Cristo Acoglanis was assassinated some years after 1988, after that meeting. I don't know if that meeting in 1988 was a casual meeting, like I want to learn something, but I don't know what to believe. But after some years, Bergoglio, the actual Pope Francis, he became very involved in the subject. In fact, he became to believe that the phenomenon was real and that extraterrestrial intelligences were visiting planet Earth.
Wow, that's a big call. So the current Pope is a tinfoil hatter.
Many people can say that. Yes, it's true. It's true. It's true. But what I say to the people is, yes, he can believe that. But you cannot say it's craziness because if you don't know his experiences, because there are a lot of sources that know firsthand about all this thinking, about all this subject regarding Pope Francis and alien life.
So, can we roll back a bit? I'm fascinated with what you say in your book about the history of the Catholic Church's engagement with the UAP mystery. And I guess a good starting point is my friend and colleague, Professor Diana Walsh-Pasulka, who's written two excellent books. One is American Cosmic and the other is Encounters. And both of them touch on the fact that the Vatican is taking an extremely close interest in UAPs. And my understanding from Diana is that she's been given some access to some of the Vatican archives on this stuff. It's quite clear, isn't it, Gabriel, that the Vatican is taking a much closer interest in the phenomenon of unidentified anomalous objects, whatever they are, than previous papacies. There seems to have been, if you like, a ramping up of awareness about the issue. There have been a number of meetings where there have been conferences held about the possibility of extraterrestrial life. What do we know about what the Vatican says about the possibility of a non-human intelligence?
Well, what we can say is this, because I know that the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, they have a big interest in this because that is public. But at the same time, there are some sources that I cannot name, but those sources have told me that inside that branch of the Vatican, there is a big interest about the subject. Okay. They take some testimonies around the world, and after that, the Jesuit priests, some Jesuit priests in the Vatican, take that information, and that information goes to Pope Francis to analyze that information about maybe those cases are real or maybe not. But he has taken seriously what that branch of the Vatican is saying about the subject, given that Pope Francis is very involved about the subject. And there is much, much more about what happened in Argentina with him and the subject. Indeed.
I'll get to that detail, but I want to get a bit of the history. So Diana Walsh-Pasulka, the professor from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, she's made a study of supernatural events in the Catholic Church, and she tells the story of a nun in the late 1800s who was woken by a glowing orb hovering above her head in her bedroom. And this was also witnessed, apparently, by the Mother Superior of the nunnery. And apparently they decided at the time that it was a lost soul who was searching for purgatory, for release from purgatory. But this idea of balls of flaming light, whatever you think about the truth or the veracity of that particular account, it does mesh with a lot of the accounts that we hear from UAP experiences today. Is it possible that religious explanations for the phenomenon are merely encounters with a non-human intelligence, do you believe?
Absolutely. And for example, just briefly, because for example, we can talk about the divergent apparitions in Garabandal in Spain in the 1960s. The other ones were in Medjugorje. Those apparitions began in the 1980s. So it was not just the Virgin Mary, but orbs, light orbs.
So when you're talking about Spain, I don't know that one. I do know about Fatima, the Fatima incident in 1917, which was three children seeing allegedly the Virgin Mary appearing to them, intriguingly as a small, quite squat 4 or 5 foot figure. But these children, described what was obviously for them a deeply spiritual experience, and it's become almost a religious shrine in Portugal. Talk me through those incidents, Medjugorje, Spain, and Fatima in Portugal.
Well, beginning with Fatima, the official explanation is something very different about what is in the archives. Fina Darmada and Joaquin Fernandez, they made a very good research because they went to the original archives in Fatima. So theirs was a 25 years investigation into the archives and in newspapers from the time. And for example, there was a kind of prophecy from some people, like they were shamans or something like that. Okay. And they said that on May 13, on 1917, there was going to happen something big. They were not Catholic. they were just talking with the spirits or something like that, what they said. And that was published in newspapers in Portugal. So on May 13, there was an apparition. Okay, but what the archive said is that the three children were in the landscape taking care of the chips. Suddenly, there was like a big ball in the air. It was hovering. Now, that big ball in the air was projecting a figure of a lady. And that lady began to talk to them, but she never told them, I am Mary. She was just the lady. That was all. Talking about saying that it was the Virgin Mary, that was a change that became after that. That is not from the mouths of the witnesses.
The more accurate version of the story from the people who've done the first-hand research is that essentially it equates more appropriately with what you and I might call UAPs, some kind of sphere, some kind of glowing sphere.
Exactly. In fact, in the last apparition, that was October 13 of 1917, talking about the miracle of the sun, what the witnesses say, what they said was that there was like a disc. That disc was hovering over them. There was smoke behind that disc. Some people said that there were occupants in that disc, that they were saying hello. Some people, maybe because for their background, they were saying that was Christ, the Father, and the Virgin Mary, that they were waving and saying hello or something like that. But that was the case. In fact, if we go to the website of Fatima, if you are going to look to the photographs, there is a photograph. You can see that disc flying above the people, and you can see the trail of the smoke that goes like this and like this.
How sure are we about the authenticity of that photograph? If it is a reliable photograph, we'll show it here. But has the authenticity of that photograph been challenged at all?
No, never. And I think that one of the best evidences is that they have that same photograph in their website. I don't know after this interview if that photograph is going to continue there, but until today that photograph is there.
See, I've never heard this before. So I was always told that Fatima was the vision of the Virgin Mary appearing to three beautiful little children who had a religious exaltation experience. And essentially it was reinforcing, obviously, the belief in Catholicism. What you're suggesting is almost heretical. It basically seems to be suggesting that there's a non-human intelligence that might have been engaging with humanity at that incident and that it's been mistaken or misused to represent the Catholic tradition.
Yes, well, what I can say is this, because something very different is the people that made the changes and the rest of the world, and even the rest of the Catholic Church, because when you see when the changes began, those changes began when Lucia, the last survivor of the witnesses, she began to talk with the Jesuits, and in very definite dates, the changes became. All that investigation is in the book of Fina de Armada and Joaquin Fernandez. It's a very good research. But there were Jesuits in other parts of the world that they were confronting those Jesuits in Portugal because they were saying, oh, no, this is very strange because there is something else. So that doesn't mean that the whole Catholic Church or that the whole Jesuit order knows about what is behind all of this.
Can I ask you, before we leave the Fatima story, again, I only have the most limited knowledge and experience of this story, but I've always heard about the 3 secrets of Fatima, and there's always been this dark rumour that the third secret, which apparently has been released, hasn't been released in totality. And there's a lot of conspiracy theories in the UAP research world suggesting that the third secret of Fatima has a link to the UAP subject. Do you give that, with your research, any credibility at all, Gabriel?
No. And the reason is this, because When you see the research, I know that what I'm going to say is very controversial, but if you see that book, it is very evident that all those secrets were an invention, okay? Because Lucia, in the original archives, Lucia always said the whole thing that the lady said was just some very small words, just a small phrase. That was all. But after the apparitions, some years after the apparitions, when she became in contact with the Jesuits, okay, those small words was a big secret. After some years, a second secret. Now the third secret was announced. I don't remember that it was in 1947 that was said that there was a third secret. But I think that the secrets had the intention to defend orthodoxy. So if that was the original intention to defend orthodoxy, I don't think that there was an invention about that. There is a third secret hidden with extraterrestrial intelligence that is going to be revealed one day or something like that.
So you don't give that any credence at all, that suggestion?
No, I am open. I am open to the possibility, but given the evidence, I don't believe it very much.
Okay, so let's talk about because I find all these incidents interesting because I'm not suggesting ill intent. What I am suggesting is that obviously there are people of deep religious faith who've interpreted these events through their own prism of their deep religiosity. And I guess it's interesting to know there's Fatima, then there's the one in Spain. Let's take us to Spain and then we'll talk to Medjugorje. What happened in Spain?
Okay, in Spain, in Garabandal, Spain, in the north of Spain, there were two little girls that they were in one of the mountains in Garabandal. It's a very small and very precious town in Garabandal. And they said in the 1960s that the Virgin Mary appeared to them in the pine trees that are in that mountain in Garabandal. Now, the very interesting thing about this apparition that is very strange for me because that in that apparition she actually said that she was Virgin Mary. Okay, that's very clear about that. She even talked to them about the Second Vatican Council that was in those days in the Vatican also. So, but there are some things because many people say that in Garabandal and in the north of Spain, a lot of lights and ball of lights are seen in the skies of Garabandal. And there were two occasions, for example, in the diary of the main witness, okay, she said that she saw like a light flying very fast in the sky. And after that, the Virgin appeared in the pine trees. Now, there was another occasion because there was like a big sphere that was besides Virgin Mary in one of the apparitions. And one of the girls asked to the Virgin Mary, "Dear lady, what is that?" And she said to them, "That is the vehicle that I used to come here." Okay,
Wow.
is very interesting, but
Do you find it you obviously find this a more plausible account than the claims about the three secrets of Fatima? Why do you find it more plausible?
first because it's more actual. There are videos and the witnesses. I don't know if all of them or three of them they are alive, and they have talked about those testimonies. So that's direct testimonies of people that are alive even to this day.
Do you think that there is a connection between what we all refer to as a non-human intelligence and what the world religions, including Catholicism and Christianity, would describe as, you know, the fundamental tenets of Christianity, a belief in God, Jesus, Virgin Mary? I mean, is that what you're suggesting?
Not exactly, because that's going to depend on the interpretation, but I think that much more research is needed because, for example, many people can say extraterrestrials because they are angels. and they are not from here. So you can say that they are extraterrestrial intelligence because they are not from here. But some people can say those are beings from other planets. Okay? But the other thing is, for example, the other interpretation can be like this, because many people in Garabandal and many researchers have went there, and there are places that are really old, that there was a very ancient culture there, where they used to say that there were the gods of the heavens that came here to the earth, even in Garabandal, and those lights were seen. So some people can say maybe there is a force behind those apparitions that say, I am the Virgin Mary, but in reality, I am not. But that's going to depend of the research.
Let me be a hard-nosed, skeptical, debunking cynic for a moment, Gabriel. Isn't it possible that there are people in the church, not of good intention, who are seeking to manipulate a perfectly natural phenomenon, or at least something anomalous that has been occurring long before perhaps even Christianity first appeared on this planet, who are manipulating that phenomena for the purposes of underlining the significance of their own religion?
Yes, I think so. We can say that that's not the fault of all the people or all the clerics in that religion. That is going to depend of people that are in the know, that maybe they know a lot more, but they are thinking, I'm going to say this. What I think, Ross, is this is I am not against religion. I am not against that. I am not against believing in God. But I think that we don't have to fear about find the truth. It's much better to find the truth and to see what is behind and what that can tell us to us.
And so what do you think is Pope Francis, Jorge Mario Bergoglio's view on what you just said? Do you think he's interested in finding the truth, even if it does perhaps undermine some of the more orthodox ideas behind Catholicism?
Well, that's a hard question in some way, and I really don't know. My suspicion is that he knows a lot about this connection. What is his interpretation about that connection, that some of them are of satanic origin, some of them are angels, some of them are extraterrestrial in the sense that they are from other planets? I really don't know, but I suspect very much, because for some other information that I have, that he knows very well that connection with the antiquity and the spheres and ladies and all those things.
One of the things that fascinated me from Diana Walsh-Pasulka's research was that there are accounts in the Catholic literature of objects doing very similar things to what we would describe as UFOs. For example, people describe balls or luminous beings descending from the sky or passing through walls. These beings terrorize, poke, and prod people with a dart-like instrument, assaulting them with a peculiar light and leaving them utterly transformed. And you cite the example of Saint Teresa of Avila, who was a 16th century nun. And then there's a more contemporary account that's told in John Mack's book about a chap called Edward Carlos, which is told in John Mack's book Abduction. Can you talk about those two events and talk about the parallels, please?
Well, if I remember well regarding the parallels, because for example, about the first witness that you told me, she used to say that there was like a sphere in her room.
This is Saint Teresa of Avila in the 16th century, yes?
Saint Teresa of Avila, exactly. She said that there was like a sphere that was in her room, okay, that was visiting, but she was very scared about that. So she didn't know what to do about that, and she talked with her superior, and her superior went to her room, and she herself saw that ball of light, or that sphere coming into her room. So what I remember was that her interpretation was something like that was a spirit. Maybe that was a spirit, okay? Because that's the Catholic thinking. Now, regarding Dr. John Mack, he saw some parallels, some things that were similar to that. the other thing that I remember, for example, is that sometimes those beings are inside of a light sphere. After that, they are not in that sphere because they go outside of that sphere. So it's very similar because it's luminous, like in the first case.
So I want to come back to Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the Pope, before he became Pope. But before we do, I want you to quickly finish this series of explanations you're giving me about these great religious miracle events that have occurred in recent modern history. And the other one, of course, is Medjugorje. What happened at Medjugorje?
Okay, regarding Medjugorje, those apparitions were in the 1980s, okay, in Croatia. And those apparitions were in a mountain. Now, there were some witnesses that they used to say that there were light spheres hovering when those apparitions of the Virgin Mary were actually occurring all those days. But there are even witnesses not exactly related with the moment of the apparitions, but close to the mountain in Medjugorje. Some people used to say that they saw like a flying disc or a spaceship, really, really big. Now, the other thing that for me is very impressive that is mountains. Okay, in the case of Garabandal, it was a mountain. In the case of Medjugorje, it was a mountain. And there are many apparitions, even in the antiquity. In Canaan, for example, in the Middle East, they used to worship their gods, not only, but in the top of the mountains, and the ladies appear there. It is very similar. Even light spheres that were appearing in those moments.
So give me your analysis. What does this all mean, Gabriel? What are the implications? If three of the great Catholic religious miracles all have anomalous disk objects or glowing orb objects, are we suggesting that the Catholic Church has perhaps appropriated, for the purposes of convincing the faithful, these incidents that are in fact UAP incidents, or are we suggesting that the UAPs are perhaps evidence that the Catholics might be right? where do you stand? I mean, are you a man of faith? What's your position on this?
I am a man of faith. Yes, I believe in God. I believe in intelligent design. I know that there are a lot of things that are not very useful to explain intelligent designs when we talk about sciences, but I think that there is very good evidence that points about that. Regarding the Catholic Church, what I can say is this: I cannot talk about what I don't know in this way. Okay, the people that know all these connections about those people are some of those people that know all these connections talking publicly in the name of the Vatican, giving their own interpretation. I don't know because I don't know. Maybe, but I don't know. Now, regarding the origin, what I can say, because it's a long story, but I just can say this at least. I think that the best place, maybe I can be wrong, but the best place to begin to analyze the origin is Eridu. Eridu in Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamia. Eridu is the best place to begin, I think.
So, what came first? Was the religion an explanation for the phenomenon, or is the phenomenon a manifestation of the religion?
No, I think that is the first option.
So,
Uh,
essentially, religion is perhaps our attempt to try to explain a phenomenon that has always been here, you're saying?
well, what I think is that the phenomenon has been here from millennia. Now, I think that the phenomenon can give their names. My name is this and this and this in this culture and in this other culture and on some others. Now, are there cases where some of those people said, I'm going to decide to put this name? Uh, we really don't know, but maybe we can do a kind of mix with the theory of Jacques Vallée. Because, for example, in Messengers of Deception, there is a very well book, for example.
So Jacques Vallée is one of the most prominent UFO researchers and commentators. He's an elderly gentleman and probably the foremost researcher and commentator.
Exactly. And Jacques Vallée talks a lot. He's not the only one, but I think that he was the first to talk about that. He talked about the religions of the past where the phenomenon was present. And I think that the phenomenon has given origin to the religion. Okay? Now, regarding people that may say, but there are some things, there are some practices that are craziness. What I can just say is this, because Jacques Vallée sometimes he said, for example, in Messengers of Deception, that the phenomenon many times works in a kind of funny way, like very absurd. Okay,
the trickster phenomenon.
Exactly, and maybe that was the case in the past. That maybe we can say it's ridiculous in Egypt or in Mesopotamia or in Canaan, in Japan, etc. It's very crazy, but if we know that the phenomenon is real, we cannot say that it's craziness in the sense that that was a human invention that could very well became from non-human intelligence. With which purposes, we really don't know for sure.
So let's go back to Argentina. And in the period we're talking about, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the future Pope Francis, is a cardinal. And so he's a very senior member of the Catholic Church. But your evidence that you've got in your book suggests that there are multiple witnesses who say that even while he was a cardinal, Bergoglio was attending functions at the home of noted ufologists in Argentina and clearly taking a very, very close interest in the phenomenon.
Yes, exactly. And I talked at least with four witnesses from Argentina. And there have been other people that have talked with some other witnesses that I even don't know. The story is this, that not just, but from the 2000s, Bergoglio used to go to Pedro Romaniuk's house. Pedro Romaniuk was a disciple of Benjamin Solari Parravicini. He was exactly. He died in 1974, and he was Catholic. And he said that in 1961 he was abducted in Buenos Aires
by aliens.
Exactly, and he was traveling in a UFO. So after some hours, he came back to the same place in Buenos Aires. But even before that, he had apparitions of Catholic saints, apparitions of goblins and fairies and all those things.
So forgive me for interrupting here, Gabriel, but I just want our audience to be clear on this. So whatever we think of the veracity, of the authenticity or the truth of the allegations made by people like Parravicini or Romaniuk, the point that you're making is that these were mentors to Bergoglio before he became Pope. And Bergoglio, as a cardinal, was engaging with these people extremely closely.
Exactly. Well, what I know is that Bergoglio, he didn't know personally Benjamin Solari Parravicini. He didn't know him personally, but he knew in person Pedro Romaniuk. And Pedro Romaniuk was disciple of Parravicini. And Parravicini used to make a lot of drawings regarding prophecies, something that were going to happen in the future in Argentina, in the world, in the Catholic Church. The coming of a new pope that was going to come with very new ideas, going to the streets to help the poor and all those things. And actually, that prophecy is something that Pope Francis is recommending to the people to do until this day. And when he was in Pedro Romaniuk's house, they used to chat a lot with people from the artistic world in Argentina, politicians like Elisa Carrió, that she is a congresswoman. She was one of the presents in those meetings. And in those meetings, they used to talk the whole night, many times. They used to talk about three subjects: extraterrestrial intelligence, that they were visiting the Earth, Benjamin Solari Parravicini prophecies, the future of the Catholic Church, and life after death.
So your point is that this is not an idle interest by Cardinal Bergoglio, as he was at the time. This was an intense interest. He was very closely engaged with the UAP mystery.
Yes, he was very deep in that. Mm-hmm.
So there's another person you talk about who's described as a spiritual advisor to Pope Francis, Eduardo Dentino. And you make the point that he's posted some amazing claims on Facebook about what he describes as a universal energy, frequencies and waves that permeate everything. He talks openly about human capabilities yet to be discovered, such as remote viewing, psychokinesis, and other supposed psychic abilities. Are you suggesting that the Pope himself is perhaps interested and engaged with those subjects as well? Because we're now steering into what I'm sure a lot of debunkers and skeptics would describe as the wacky and the crazy.
Yes, exactly. Well, two things regarding that statement. First, Eduardo Dentino, he was close to Pedro Romaniuk. Okay? And Pedro Romaniuk, he had a place called Fece in Argentina. And that was a place to make contact. Well, is a place because that place is today in Virrey del Pino in Buenos Aires in Argentina. Some of them are Catholics. They believe in the Virgin Mary, but they also believe in extraterrestrial intelligence. And they talk also about remote viewing. And Eduardo Dentino knew Pedro Romaniuk. And I know, because I talked with a source about that Jorge Bergoglio believe about these things like remote viewing and psychokinesis.
Now, the thing I find intriguing about the Fece site, the Romaniac location, is that it's also said in your book that Pedro Romaniac spoke of Jesus as, quote, chief of the celestial teachers of the extraterrestrials. So Romaniac was actually of the belief that Jesus is an alien.
Yes, exactly.
And that's what Romaniac has suggested as a mentor to Bergoglio, now Pope Francis.
Exactly. Well, regarding that he's an extraterrestrial, maybe not in the sense that is created. Maybe yes, maybe not. But the thing is that Pedro Romaniuk, he wrote some books, and for example, he wrote that Jesus is the master of the universe, and he's going to come back in the second coming with all these extraterrestrial beings to save the earth. There, in 2018, I was in a meeting here in Costa Rica, and one of the best friends of Pope Francis was here, and he gave a very interesting theme, and he said something about the gods of the other cultures that are in heaven, but the main of them is Jesus. And I was present there personally.
So let me be clear about this, Gabriel. A lot of what we're discussing here would be heretical to a lot of the Orthodox people inside the Catholic Church. And it's not fair to say that Pope Francis's views, if in fact he subscribes to these views, would be the general view of people in the Catholic Church, is it? It would be quite on the fringe to suggest that these ideas are in any way the accepted view.
Exactly. And what I recommend to the people is this, okay? Because, for example, this information is not so secret, but what I can say to the people that do not know about this, okay, they don't know the other thoughts that he has in mind about the subject. What I can say is that he's very open. And I think that the people need to give him the opportunity in the future, I don't know, to know what he thinks about the subject, because there is a lot of evidence that says that the phenomenon is real.
Now, this is where I want to make a segue with the fact that Bergoglio is, as I understand it, a Jesuit in his background in the Catholic Church. And I think you need to explain the significance of the role that the Jesuit faith, if you like, inside the Catholic Church has played. They're very progressive, and I think it's particularly significant in relation to the Fatima series of incidents, the sightings by people in the Fatima location in Portugal. There's been a very big attempt by the Jesuit arm of the Catholic Church to reconcile with the Freemasons. What was it in history that happened in Portugal that led to a conflict between the Catholic Church and the Freemasons?
Well, what I want to be clear is about this, because I know that a lot of people is going to see craziness and conspiracy theory. I am very much against conspiracy theories, but this is not conspiracy theory. Is history, because Freemasonry always has been about progressiveness. Now, the very Catholic Church used to be very conservative. So when they were in Portugal in the 1910 until 1917, and after that year, they began to take control of the government in some degree. So they were very much against the Catholic Church because they didn't like the union about church and state, because the Freemasons are about that you have to be free to worship God as you want to believe it. So, but there was a kind of war about that in Portugal. And after that, in the middle of that war, the apparitions of Fatima became to happen.
So Fatima started around 1917, didn't they? What happened? What was the reaction of the Freemasons, who were slowly gaining power in Portugal, to the claims that were being made by the Catholic Church about these apparitions at Fatima?
They were that the children were lying, and that was an operation from the Catholic Church in order to recover its power in Portugal. That was a total invention, but that wasn't an invention because the evidence is very hard.
And so where does Pope Francis stand? I mean, as I understand it, it's still proscribed officially by the Catholic Church that you can't be a Catholic and a Freemason, that Freemasonry is incompatible with the Catholic faith. Is that still the case?
More or less, we can say. Why? Because, for example, November last year, Pope Francis signed a document that was stating what we knew from 1983 from Cardinal Ratzinger, the past Pope Benedict XVI, that Freemasonry was not allowed in the Catholic Church, that no Catholic can be a member of the Freemasonry society or the order. But it's a kind of contradictory, but because when you see in years past, Pope Francis was very welcome with some of the Freemasons from France. And he has been very, very open with the Freemasons in Austria also. And in fact, I had some communication some years ago with one of the persons in charge in the Freemasonry in Austria, and he stated to me that the conversations with the Vatican were very well with Pope Francis.
So just explain that to me then. Why would Pope Francis be seeking a rapprochement, as you suggest, with Freemasonry? What's Pope Francis's position on Freemasonry? And this is where we get into the sensitivity you have about being accused of pushing a conspiracy theory. What is it that you know, Gabriel, about Pope Francis and Freemasonry?
Well, I have 3 or 4 testimonies. For example, when I told you that in 1988 he was more open about some other conversations like extraterrestrial intelligence because he used to be very conservative. Some people say that in those years, 1988, 1992, something like that, he was in contact with Freemasonry. and he became a Freemason himself.
You're suggesting the Pope is a secret Freemason in defiance of the Vatican's own rules on Freemasonry.
Well, I have the original recording, an audio recording of a phone conversation with that they are talking about some Iranian representatives in Argentina. They are talking about a conversation that one of them had with the Vatican intelligence representative in Argentina. And he said to them, to this Iranian person, that he said that he was a Freemason.
Before you go any further, I think we should explain this to our audience because it's in danger of getting complicated. And I think this is a really interesting point. So in what period, when was this attack? There was a terror attack in 1994. There was an attack on an Argentinian-Israeli mutual association building in Buenos Aires that killed 85 people and injured hundreds of people. And in 2006, Argentinian prosecutors accused Iran of directing the bombing carried out by Hezbollah. And it has come out, including in some of the more prominent newspapers in Argentina, that a former senior official with Argentina's intelligence service, Juan Bautista Joffre, also a former ambassador, told an Argentine TV show that when they were investigating an Iranian-sponsored terror attack on Argentinian soil, they listened to a wiretap between Yusuf Khalil and Abdul Karim Paz. This was reported in the La Nación newspaper, which is one of the top newspapers in Argentina. And Yusuf told Karim that he had met the head of the Vatican intelligence services in Argentina, a guy called Hector Luis Yeremia, and they'd agreed to introduce him to the head of Vatican intelligence. The Vatican intelligence chief in Argentina told Yusuf he was a Freemason, and so was Pope Francis. So you've listened to that recording and you've verified that that's what was said. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. It is a phone recording of 8 minutes because when Joffre said that on television, okay, I know that he's very serious doing investigations about all these things, but I was thinking I need to listen to the recording, and I got access to the recording and I listened the whole recording. And he said that Pope Francis is a Freemason.
You've also cited in your book how in 2013, Angel Jorge Clavero, the then Grand Master of the Argentine Grand Lodge, which is a Freemasonry lodge, told one of the top newspapers in Argentina that although there's not a fluid relationship between Freemasonry and the Catholic Church, the Jesuits, of which of course Pope Francis is one, are the closest sector from Catholicism. And he pointed out, quote, "There have even been Jesuits who, with the permission of their priors or provincials, have belonged to Freemasonry." So that's a very big hint from the Argentine Freemason lodge that the Pope or people close to him may in fact be linked to Freemasonry.
Yes, exactly. And I think this because Freemasonry was very much against the Jesuit order, mainly in the 16th century. Not just, but mainly in the 16th century. And with the Jesuits was the same case. They were very much against Freemasonry. And the Holy Alliance, that was the name of the Vatican Intelligence Service at that time, most of the intelligence agents from the Vatican in centuries past were Jesuits, most of them. And Freemasonry was very much against that. But after some time, they became more or less more friends.
Now, Gabriel, why does this matter? It matters to me, journalistically, because I'm fascinated by the links that my friend and informant David Grush suggested to me in an interview last year with News Nation, where he pointed to the Vatican's alleged role in the purported transfer of non-human technology, an alien spacecraft no less. In 1933, it crashed in Magenta, was held by the fascists under Mussolini, seen by the Nazis, but eventually covertly handed over to the Americans, alleges David Grush, in about 1944. And this suggestion of a secret history with NHI technology, a knowledge of non-human intelligence by the Vatican, it certainly sits well with what you're saying about Pope Francis's interest in the subject.
Exactly. And look, you told me before that the Jesuits are very progressive, if the most progressive branch in the Catholic Church. All of them, or almost all of them, have PhDs. I know some of them personally. They are very good people. I know them very well, and they are very open about all this subject. And I can tell you something more because, for example, when David Grush said that Pope Pius XII helped the US with that object, the main advisor of Pope Pius XII was a German Jesuit. And he was the head of the entity, the Vatican Intelligence Service at that time. I said that it was called the Holy Alliance, but in 1936, according to Spanish-Peruvian journalist Eric Frattini, the name of the Vatican Intelligence Service changed in 1936 to, the name was the entity. Until this day is the entity. Now, that main advisor of Pope Pius XII, that he was a Jesuit, a German Jesuit, he also was the head of the entity at that time. And he also had contacts with the FBI in the US and some agencies. So I see very easy that maybe it was through him, maybe, that Pope Francis helped the US to took that device to that country.
I also find it fascinating, and this is neither here nor there, but Jesus James Angleton, who went on to become the CIA's head of counterintelligence, he happened to be living and based for the OSS at the time, the American equivalent of the CIA at the time, in Milan, in northern Italy, very close to Magenta.
Exactly. And take into account this, because James Jesus Angleton, during Second World War and after that, he had intelligence contacts in the Vatican. Okay, during Second World War, because of Nazi Germany invading Europe. Okay, it was not because they liked each other very much, but was by convenience. Okay, because they had some enemies in common. And after that, they cooperated in Italy, James Jesus Angleton in Italy with Pope Pius XII after Second World War. And close to Magenta, and this German advisor of Pope Francis, I think that is a very good possibility that worked in that way.
So let's bring this even further into the present day, because one of the things that just hit me like a brick when I was doing my research was the incontrovertible evidence, literally the emails of John Podesta, who was at the time a senior advisor to President Obama, based in the White House. And they were leaked by the Russians. Incredible. It was a GRU disinformation operation. They were leaked to WikiLeaks and posted online. They don't seem to be online at the moment. Somebody keeps on taking them down. But what they reveal is that John Podesta was being approached, among other things, by Edgar Mitchell, the former Apollo 11 astronaut. And Edgar Mitchell had sent an email to Podesta in January 2015 claiming that the Catholic Church knows all about an extraterrestrial intelligence engaging with planet Earth. And it made much of the fact that the Vatican had hosted global seminars of the repercussions of humans interacting with ETI and how this will affect religion and consciousness. Do you believe Edgar Mitchell's claims that the Vatican is essentially preparing humanity for the inevitable moment when we're told about the existence of a non-human intelligence?
Well, I think that the answer is yes, because like I told you, the Vatican Intelligence Service is very behind in this topic. Now, the other thing is that in those emails, one of the persons that Dr. Edgar Mitchell was trying to contact with John Podesta was through a friend, and that friend is Terence Mansfield, and that was revealed in WikiLeaks, and she wrote to John Podesta about the possibility to talk with Dr. Edgar Mitchell about disclosure in the US about the extraterrestrial intelligence, and also to talk to John Podesta about what the Vatican knows about extraterrestrial intelligence, because in the past the Vatican used to share some important information about this with other countries, but those emails doesn't name which countries the Vatican shared that information.
I find it intriguing. Those WikiLeaks emails are probably the most overlooked bit of evidence to show that there was very clearly, prior to the 2016 presidential election, there was very clearly negotiations underway between senior generals in the Pentagon, a senior member of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, Robert Weiss, and John Podesta, in apparent contemplation of a Hillary Clinton victory. There was clearly a contemplation that there would be some kind of controlled disclosure about non-human intelligence in 2017 by President Hillary Clinton. You have to wonder sometimes what would have happened if history had gone that way in 2017.
Yes, exactly, because one thing that is very interesting to me is this, and I am not saying, oh, I believe this. No, no, no. It's just that it's very interesting. Why right now, in this moment, when in the US there are happening a lot of things about this subject, trying to reveal what the US government knows, why exactly this Pope is in this moment? The Pope more open about this subject, because take into account that after that, John Podesta was seen in Italy eating in a restaurant with a Freemason that had access in the Vatican. That Freemason was in contact with the head of the Vatican Observatory at that time, Jose Gabriel Funes.
And what did Father Funes say? Please remind our audience what Father Funes said about the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence.
I don't know if this was with some purpose, but that announcement was in May 13 of 2008 or 2009. I digress about the year, but 2008 or 2009. I think it was in 2008. The thing it was that he said in public television that extraterrestrial intelligence, that was a very strong possibility, and that do not contradict the Catholic faith. Now take into account this, because before Pope Francis became Pope, Jose Gabriel Funes and Bergoglio knew each other for many years in Argentina. Now, in 2016, they are working all of this, and that Freemason was in contact with Jose Gabriel Funes, and Jose Gabriel Funes and this Freemason used to help each other to open the door for going to some meetings in Russia to talk about extraterrestrial intelligence. There were people from US, Freemasons, from China, from Israel, and they used to talk about the possibility about all of this that maybe is in the scriptures, in the Old Testament or in the New Testament, in the Holy Bible. So they used to talk about this, and even they talked in Russia that was true, that there were extraterrestrial intelligences that were visiting the earth, and that information went to the Vatican through this Freemason.
Well, you've helped us dot the I's and cross the T's very well, my friend Gabriel, but there's one final question before we do a wrap. And that's coming back to what we introduced this show with, which is the Pope's speculation about whether he would baptize a Martian. What did he eventually say? Did he say he would be willing to baptize a Martian?
Well, what I can say is this. The context was that we need to welcome to any person from any country. That was the context. But if you took the history, his background in Argentina with this subject, maybe there was another intention, like a hint for the future regarding something to say.
In closing, it's fair to say you are speculating that Pope Francis may very well be very strongly inclined towards a fairly progressive admission about the existence of a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet.
Yes, and because this small thought, given that Pope Francis liked a lot Parravicini said about a new papacy for the future, to unite the world, and a future where extraterrestrial intelligence is going to be revealed to the world.
Well, on that closing, I think that's a really good point to end on. Thank you for provoking all of us, Gabriel, and we all look forward to reading your book, and we'll make sure we display it in the endnotes and make sure people can link to it. But Gabriel Pedra, thank you so much for joining Reality Check, and thank you for giving us how does one say this, a contrarian view on what the Vatican really thinks about UFOs.
You're welcome, Ross, and thank you for having me.